students, welcome to the lecture Religious and Devotional Hindi Films during the Colonial period. And today we'll talk about that how religious and devotional Hindi films and cinema they have been made during the colonial period, and how cinema has played an important role in that sense. And even when you talk about the first film Raja Harishchandra, when it was being made, it was also a religious film. It was borrowed from Mahabharata, one of the epics, and Ramayana too. And we find that when this particular film came in 1913, when Dada Saheb Phalke made this particular film, and the story was known to the audience because of the fact that how the literature, epical literature, or the ideas which were associated with the epics they were known to the masses, and they were aware about the story. And when Raja Harishchandra was made in 1913, and how it was also being viewed by some of the national movement leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who supported Raja Harishchandra as a Swadeshi venture, because that was also the period of the national movement. So what we find that how religious and devotional Hindi films over a period of time, how these kinds of films they were being made during the colonial period, because we find that censorship was very reactionary during the colonial period, and because of this kind of a nature, they did not want to allow films which were talking about the democratic ideas or revolutionary ideas. So in that sense, we find that the theme of the film, like in the context of the devotional and the religious film, was conducive to the colonial rulers. And when you talk about Raja Harishchandra, as I told you that how he was in a way believed in the idea of honesty, and during his entire lifetime various kinds of trials and tribulations which he encountered, but he was not ready to lose the path of honesty and truth. And apart from this film, we find that there were so many other films which were made on religious themes. And one of the another genre which became popular during this time was the devotionals. And devotionals, they were based on the lives of various saints, maybe Tulsidas, Surdas, Chandidas, Tukaram, Kabir, so many of the saints which were there in India, and how these saints they were preaching the ideas of equality, how they were preaching the ideas of simplicity. So these kinds of concerns were very important at that point of time, because India was under the colonial rule, and colonial rule was very oppressive. And Indians, when they were making films on these kinds of themes, then we realize that they were also being seen as some sort of a safe bet, because we find, because during this particular period till 1931 we have the silent cinema. So when the story was known to the audience, then the audience could easily relate when the story was known. And we also find that because of the censorship of the colonial rulers, we find that such kind of films they were being passed by the censor authorities. Though the Censorship Act or the Indian Cinematograph Act came in 1918, as you can see on the screen as well, that these kinds of narratives, basically they were being taken from the sacred texts, and they were trying to explore the legendary figures which were there from an earlier period, and the interface between the past and present is also being shown in the films. And when you talk about that these kinds of accounts which were being shown, which was a comparatively modern medium, or the kind of a media which was their cinema, and so it was both contemporary from that point of view, that the kind of technology which was being used, and we also find that they were also talking about the past. So this kind of an interface which was happening during this time was an important development. And we see that apart from Dada Saheb Phalke, there were the filmmakers as well, and so many of them they were making the religious and the devotional films. And we find that when you talk about the silent cinema, as I told you that till 1931 we have the silent films. It does not mean that there were no dialogues and songs in that sense, because the people, those who were sitting below the screen, some of the musicians, they were trying to narrate what actually was happening on the screen. So we see that we do not in a way say that even though they were the silent ones, but at the same time some kind of an entertainment was also going on in the theatre. And as we see that how that was a period when you have just in 1905 you had the Swadeshi movement, and how the various factions of the Congress, though the moderates, extremists, so many of, and later the Gandhian phase, we find that people, they were joining the national movement through other kinds of parties and other kinds of platforms as well. And we see that when these kinds of ideas which were being shown in the religious and the devotional films, when the ethical values, when the ideas of nationalism, etc., they were being shown in these films, and such kind of an impact they were able to create on the audience. And we also find that leaders like Tilak, when they talk about the Swadeshi idea, and we find that when audience was seeing such kind of films, then there are a lot of respect for the heavenly things which were being shown on the screen by the filmmakers. And when gods and goddesses, they appeared on the screen, then many of the illiterate viewers, or even the literate ones for that matter, they bowed down in worship, and how they believed that the deities which are shown on the screen, they were real, and how they had been brought the icy pages of epics and scriptures to life on screen, and they perform marvels as well. So we find that such kind of portrayals naturally were appealing to the audience, and when these kinds of deities, they were being shown on the screen, then they were being liked by the audience. And at the same time we also see that even in later times in 1990s and 80s, 1980s, we find that when television serials like Ramayana and Mahabharat came, and how the how the actors of these tele-series or television serials, they were being viewed by the audience, how they were being respected and venerated, and how they were considered as gods and goddesses. So this kind of an approach could be seen in 80s and 90s. So we can very well imagine a period of 1910s and 1920s for that matter, where such kind of images were very raw, and they were very new to the audience, and how the audience was trying to savor them, was to love them, and they were trying to convey all sorts of praise for them. And when you talk about God, we also talk about the creation of the God, and how saints and devotees from the later times, as I told you, they also had a lot of influence on the landscape of the nation. And these saints, for example, and they how had the ability to perform the miracles, and their lives and teachings were revered by the people, and they had a lot of impact on the public as well. When you even now talk about these saints, and a number of films in the later times, they have also been made on the lives of the saints. And Sant Tukaram, for example, in 1930s was one of the milestone films which was even sent at the international level, and it also received a lot of praise at the international level. Similarly, recently a Marathi film with the same title, Tukaram, has been made. So we find that when such kind of films, they were being made, then how the audience in a way reacted to these kinds of performances. And as I told you earlier as well, that how 80s and 90s for that matter, where you find that the film actors and actresses, those who were working in these films, how they were being viewed by the audience, where they were seen as gods and goddesses. And when you talk about the ideas at that particular period, how India was under the colonial rule, and because of being in the during the in the colonial clutches, we find that the ideas of patriotism, they were being weaved in various religious or historical topic, where you will find that the figure of a nationalist leader was being shown. But it was they were trying in a way to hoodwink the censorship authorities. But we find that how the censors, they functioned at that point of time, and many of the scenes in these kinds of films which were trying to project these ideas, these scenes, they were being excised, they were being cut, they were being censored. And so we see that the censorship authority at that point of time, they were ready to throttle any kind of nationalist aspiration which was being shown in the film. And when you talk about the kind of religious traditions of India and the dedication of the typical Indian, in the sense that how they were in a way connected to the religious topics, and Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan has argued that these kinds of themes, they also have wider appeal, since the pertinent episodes are recognized and appreciated by people throughout India. And when you talk about films like Gopal Krishna, directed by Fateh Lal and Damble, it captured the essence of rural India. And when you talk about these films, where, for example, Gopal Krishna, where we find that how Krishna was in a way trying to come in confrontation with Kans, and the rule of Kans was reflective of the colonial rule, and the kind of act which was being done by Krishna in various ways was to be seen in the framework of the national movement, where people, they were ready to fight the colonial oppressor. So such kind of films, they also had a lot of undercurrents, and these undercurrents were largely concerned with the national movement. The filmmakers were also aware what they were doing, but it was very difficult to give clear cut messages through some kind of a direct presentations, because they were very well aware that the British had such kind of a censorship machinery where such scenes will not be passed. So we find that they tried to in a way project such kind of pictures, such kind of scenes which could be passed by the censorship authority in India. And at the same time, we also see that these films are able to communicate what the filmmakers wanted to communicate to them regarding the ideas of nationalism, patriotism, etc. And we find that when you talk about this film, how the trick shots which were there in Gopal Krishna, and many of the scenes which were relating to crowd, and how these scenes, they became very popular. And when the idea of anti-imperialism was growing against the colonial rulers, and how the religious tales or legends, they were seen as the symbols of resistance to the colonial oppression, and how when Krishna was fighting Kans, then how the idea of patriotism and rebellion was gaining momentum among the viewers as well. And when Krishna is talking about the misrule of Kans, then definitely such kind of connections, they were being drawn, that he was talking about the colonial persecution which was happening in India. And when Krishna also talked about his uncle's poor judgment and leadership, oppression and tyranny, then they were also reflective of what British were doing in India, because British, they were also in a way engaging in such kind of activities, that many of their activities were considered to be tyrannical in nature. So all such kind of comparisons, they could be made at this point of time. And we find that many times filmmakers, they were not in a way in a position to depict clearly or directly what they wanted to convey to the audience. and many a times we find that because of this they turn to metaphor and allegory. So we find that how the Indian filmmakers many a times resorted to this kind of an idea where they turn to such kinds of symbolisms where they could communicate what they had to communicate with regard to the national movement and ideas which were nationalist and patriotic in nature. And we find that when such kind of films which were dealing with the religious and the devotional aspect, and how the religious and devotional aspect was embedded in the Indian audience, and many times we find that how the Indian middle class women, those who were not allowed to go out, they did not have that kind of a freedom to travel at that point of time. And but in this particular time we find that these women, they were allowed to engage in some kind of social activities where they could go together to watch films of such religious nature. And we find that apart from the Indian filmmakers, those who are making the religious, devotional and other kinds of films, we also have a number of films which were imported from outside. So we find during this time these foreign films, and these foreign films, they were being viewed by the male audiences. So you did not have much female audience, because they were not considered to be appropriate for the female audiences. So we find that how the public showings of many of the early religious films, and how over a period of time such kind of pictures, when they were also women, they were also being allowed to go and watch these films because they were concerned with the religious theme. And it also had another important impact in the context that when women went out to see these films, and many times some kind of topicals or newsreels, etc., they were also being shown during these films. And many of the female leaders of the national movement, they were also being shown in those topicals and newsreels. And when the Indian women, when they went out to see such films, then we realized that they were also inspired by such women, those who were participating in the national movement. So such kind of things, they were also happening at that point of time. And apart from Raja Harishchandra, we see that there were other films like Satyavan Savitri, which were being made during this time. And Shri Krishna Janm, for that matter, was another film which was made, and there were so many others with different titles dealing with the various gods and goddesses. And we find that when women, they were going in groups and they were participating in the bhakti experience during that time. And as I told you earlier as well, that how when these films, they were being shown at that point of time, topicals, they were also being exhibited. And when women, they saw these topicals where the national movement women leaders, they were being shown. So such kind of things, they were also happening in that sense during this particular period, as you can see on the screen. And when you talk about the various kinds of norms which were there in the society, so we realize that women leaders like Nivedita or Annie Besant, Sarojini Naidu, they were in a way speaking out publicly as the allies of the women's liberation movement. And they had a lot of focus on the bhakti films. Emphasis on humanism and women's visibility in public life was on the rise. So all of them, in a way, was very helpful for the women, those who were coming out to watch these films, and how they were also getting some kind of an idea about the national movement. And when they came to know about the participation of the women leaders, then there was also an urge to participate in the movement. And we find that many of the leaders, like Mahatma Gandhi for that matter, he urged women to join the national movement in large numbers. And this we see in the civil disobedience movement, where so many women they joined the civil disobedience movement. They participated in large numbers, as Gandhi felt that if a woman will join the movement, then that means that the entire house is going to join the movement. So these kinds of things, they were also happening at that point of time. And we find that how the humanist and the reformist ideals, they were prominent in the religious and the devotional writings, and how they also disseminated in a way the notions of the independence movement as well. So we in a way realize that such kind of pictures or such kind of portrayals, they were very important in that sense, because they were talking about India's ancient past. And this India's ancient past had a lot of things which were very, very important in the framework of the national regeneration. The ideas of truth and honesty, they were everlasting in that sense. So we'll talk about further about the aspects which are associated with the religious and the devotional films in our next lecture. Thank you very much.